What you are about to hear is a story of betrayal so profound it defies belief, but it is also a story of a father's love so fierce it becomes an unstoppable force of justice. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Arthur Stanley, and at 64 years of age, I was under the impression that I had witnessed every form of cruelty this world could possibly dish out. I was mistaken. The most vicious blow of all landed at exactly 3:17 a.m. on a crisp Tuesday morning in October. The shrill ring of my phone sliced through the silence, heralding the kind of call that irrevocably divides your life into a before and an after. Mr. Stanley, this is Dr. Peterson at St. Joseph's Hospital. Your son, Leo, has been admitted into our intensive care unit. The sleep vanished from my system in an instant. My feet were already on the cold hardwood floor next to my bed before the doctor had finished his sentence. The old cotton robe I wore, a soft gray that was my late wife, Martha's favorite, suddenly felt as cold as ice against my skin. "What's happened? Is he all right?" He and his wife welcomed their baby about 6 hours ago, but there were significant complications. He went into cardiac arrest. We've managed to stabilize him for the moment, but the doctor's pause felt like it stretched for an eternity, sharp and terrifying. "You need to get here as quickly as you can." I was dressed and in my car in under 10 minutes. My silver hair was uncombed, and the simple gold watch on my wrist, Martha's final gift to me before she passed 2 years ago, felt like a piece of armor against my skin. The freeways were eerily empty at that hour, leaving just me and the encroaching dawn in a desperate race toward the only child I had left in this world. My wonderful, kind-hearted Leo, who had, against my better judgment, married that frivolous woman, was now in a fight for his very life while bringing her child into the world. The hospital corridors were thick with the smell of antiseptic and a quiet, lingering despair. I had walked these same halls when Martha was fading away, and the scent dredged up memories I had fought so hard to keep buried. But this felt different, sharper. This was my son, my only boy, lying in that sterile bed with machines doing the breathing for him. "Mr. Stanley." A young male nurse approached me, his blue scrubs rumpled from what must have been an exhausting night. "I'm Evan Marks. I've been looking after your son. How is he?" I asked. My voice strained, though I could already see Leo through the large glass window of the ICU door. He looked so small and pale against the stark white sheets, tethered to more blinking machines than I thought one body could possibly endure. "He's stable, but his condition is critical. The stress on his body was immense, and his heart couldn't take it. We're keeping a very close watch on him." Nurse Marks briefly glanced down at his chart before meeting my eyes again. "We've been attempting to get in touch with his wife, but what? Her phone just goes straight to voicemail. We used the emergency contact information she provided and tried several different numbers. We haven't been able to reach her." A cold dread began to settle deep in my gut. "When was the last time anyone here spoke with her?" "Yesterday evening, just before things became critical," he said, a note of hesitation in his voice. "She mentioned she needed to step out for a work-related matter." He paused. "Mr. Stanley, do you have any idea where she might be?" That was the critical question, wasn't it? Where on earth was Tiffany Mallory while her husband was fighting to stay alive and her newborn son was in the NICU, so tiny and premature? I excused myself, stepping back into the quiet hallway. My hands were far steadier than they had any right to be as I pulled out my own phone. I dialed Tiffany's number, straight to voicemail, just as the nurse had said. I disconnected and immediately tried again. The same result. After the third attempt, my worry began to curdle into suspicion. By the fifth call, That suspicion had hardened into something far more sinister. I opened my mobile banking application. The one linked to the joint account Leo and Tiffany used, an account I had established for them as a wedding present and still had oversight of for emergencies. What I found there sent a chill through my veins, making my blood feel like ice water. There were charges from Las Vegas, a cascade of them. 5-star hotels, lavish restaurants, and multiple casinos. A great many casinos. The timestamp on the latest transaction was from just 2 hours ago, long after Leo had been rushed into the ICU, long after any devoted wife would have been speeding to her husband's side. I scrolled through the list of charges, each one feeling like a physical blow. Champagne at the Bellagio, extravagant room service at Caesar's Palace, entries to high-stakes poker tournaments at the Venetian. All of this was happening while my son was dying and his son was fighting for every single breath inside an incubator. But the final, most egregious insult, the one that made my hands tremble with a white-hot rage, was a charge from an upscale men's boutique. Expensive designer clothes, the kind no woman buys for a husband who has just become a father. I decided to try her number one last time. This time, something changed. A man answered. "Hello?" His voice was youthful, a little slurred, and slightly out of breath. I could hear loud music in the background, peals of laughter, and the unmistakable cacophony of a casino floor. "Who is this?" I demanded, my own voice low and steady, though I already suspected the answer. "Who's asking?" the man's voice retorted, followed by a giggle. "Tiffany, sweetheart, your phone is ringing." I heard her voice in the background, sharp and filled with panic. Hang up the phone right now." The line went dead. I stood there in the sterile silence of that hospital corridor for a full 30 seconds, letting the horrifying reality of the situation wash over me completely. My son was on the brink of death. His son was in a desperate struggle to survive. And Tiffany Mallory was in Las Vegas with some man, gambling away their entire future as her family was shattering into pieces. Most people in my position would have broken down and cried. Most people would have screamed in fury. Most people would have called back, demanding answers, pleading with her to come home, trying to appeal to whatever shred of conscience she might have buried deep within her worthless soul. I am not most people. I walked back to the ICU, leaned over and kissed my son's forehead, navigating the maze of tubes and wires. I whispered, "Don't you worry about a thing, my boy. Dad is going to take care of everything." Then I drove home, poured myself a stiff drink, and opened my laptop. If Tiffany Mallory believed she could enjoy a gambling spree while my son's life was hanging precariously in the balance, then I was about to show her what a real gamble looked like. And unlike her, I never ever lose. At 4 a.m., with Leo stabilized, but still in critical condition, I was seated in my home office. Banking statements and credit card bills were spread across the polished surface of my mahogany desk. The room was filled with the gentle fragrance of the roses I had clipped from my garden the previous day, back in a time when I still held on to the naive belief in the fundamental decency of the woman my son had chosen to marry. The credit card charges painted a story more sordid and calculated than anything I could have possibly imagined. The trip to Vegas was no spontaneous whim. It had been meticulously planned for weeks. Hotel reservations had been confirmed 3 weeks prior. Airline tickets were booked under 2 names, Tiffany Mallory and Ryder Vance. Even his name sounded like it was plucked from a cheap, trashy novel. I did what any intelligent man with ample resources and a powerful motivation would do. I began to dig, researching everything I could possibly find about this Ryder Vance. I scoured social media profiles, looked into employment histories, and traced financial connections. By 6 a.m., I had assembled a complete and damning picture of my son's wife's betrayal. The evidence was all there, time-stamped on social media for the world to see, There were photos of them, laughing and clinking champagne glasses at the exact moment Leo was being wheeled into emergency surgery. The images depicted Tiffany and her lover lounging by a resort pool, him in a bikini so expensive it likely cost more than some people's monthly rent, and her in designer swim trunks that I recognized because Leo had bought them for her birthday just last month. But it was the final photograph that sealed her fate in my mind. It showed Tiffany and Ryder locked in a passionate embrace next to a roulette table. His hands were tangled in her hair, and her wedding ring was clearly visible as she groped him with the abandon of a teenager. The timestamp on this particular photo read 11:47 p.m., a full 4 hours after Leo had flatlined and been miraculously resuscitated by the hospital staff. I printed every single photograph, saved every digital receipt, and documented every single lie. Then I brewed myself a strong cup of coffee and called the hospital for an update on my son. "Your son had a stable night," Nurse Marks informed me. "There have been no significant changes, which in his condition is actually very good news." "Has his wife called or made an appearance?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "No, sir. Still not a single word from her." After ending the call, I returned to my laptop and accessed their joint account one last time. Tiffany had charged another $5,000 at a poker table at 2 in the morning. My son's wife was, in the most literal sense, gambling away their future while he fought for his life. That was the moment I made my first decisive move. With a series of deliberate clicks, I initiated a transfer of every single cent from their joint account into Leo's personal savings account, an account to which only he had access. A total of $47,000. It was their entire life savings, which included the money I had gifted them for the down payment on their home, as well as the inheritance Leo had received from his mother. Next, I canceled all of her credit cards. Every single one of them. The ones linked to the joint account, and the ones I had co-signed for back when her credit score was too poor for her to qualify on her own. I even canceled the corporate card her company had issued, which was backed by our family's financial guarantee. By 7 a.m., Tiffany Mallory was effectively stranded in Las Vegas with nothing but the cash in her wallet and whatever remained of her line of credit at the casino tables. I estimated she had, at most, $300 to her name. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unfamiliar Nevada area code appeared. The credit card was just declined. Must be a mistake. I deleted it without a second thought. 5 minutes later, another text arrived. "Arthur, it's Tiffany. Something is wrong with the cards. Can you please call the bank for me?" Delete. By 8 a.m., my phone was vibrating every few minutes. Text after text, each one more frantic than the last. "The hotel is saying they can't process the payment for our room. Arthur, please, you need to call me back. This is urgent. I don't know what's going on. The bank account is showing a zero balance. Arthur, answer your damn phone." I switched my phone to silent mode and drove to the hospital to be with Leo. He looked so fragile in that large hospital bed, dwarfed by the machines and monitors that surrounded him, but his color seemed slightly better, and the nurse informed me that his vital signs had stabilized during the night. "He's a fighter," Nurse Marks said with a kind, reassuring smile. "Just like his father," I imagine. If only he knew the half of it. I spent the entire morning at Leo's bedside, holding his hand and reading to him from the book of poems we used to share when he was a boy. They were the same poems his mother had read to him when he was little, the same ones that had brought us both comfort after Martha passed away and left us to navigate the world alone. By noon, my phone's call log showed 6-7 missed calls from various Nevada numbers, along with dozens of increasingly desperate text messages. The final text, which came in at 11:43 a.m., was short and to the point. It simply read, "I know what you did." I allowed myself a small, grim smile and typed back my first and only reply, "Good." At 2 p.m., I was still sitting by Leo's bed when my phone rang again. This time it wasn't a number from Las Vegas. It was a local number, one I recognized as belonging to Tiffany's boss, Stella Drake, the vice president of commercial development at Morrison & Associates. "Mr. Stanley, this is Stella Drake. I was calling to check in. I hope Leo is doing okay. Thank you for asking, Stella. He's putting up a fight, and he's stable for now. I'm actually calling about Tiffany," she said. "She was scheduled to lead an important client presentation this morning, but she was a no-show. We haven't been able to reach her, and frankly, we're getting concerned." I let the silence hang in the air for exactly 3 seconds before I spoke. "Stella, I need to share something with you, and it's of a rather delicate nature." 20 minutes later, Stella Drake was in possession of the entire sordid story. I had emailed her the photographs, the bank records, and a detailed timeline that showed exactly where Tiffany had been while her husband was fighting for his life. I had also forwarded copies of the credit card statements, which clearly showed Tiffany financing her affair with money that was meant to be securing her family's future. "Mr. Stanley," Stella said, her voice tight with controlled fury and disgust, "I want to assure you that Morrison & Associates has a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of behavior from our employees. The company has a morality clause in all our employment contracts, and what you've shown me is a flagrant violation." "I understand completely, Stella. A company's reputation is paramount." "Exactly. And I want you to be aware that, effective immediately, Tiffany Mallory is no longer employed by our firm. We will also be conducting a thorough review of all her client accounts and her recent financial transactions." After hanging up the phone, I leaned back in the uncomfortable hospital chair and closed my eyes for a moment. In less than 12 hours, I had systematically dismantled Tiffany Mallory's life, transforming her from a successful professional with a wonderful husband and a newborn son into an unemployed adulterer, stranded in Las Vegas with her credit in shambles and her reputation completely destroyed. And I was only just getting started. My phone buzzed again with another call from Nevada. This time I decided to answer. "Arthur." Tiffany's voice was ragged and desperate. "What in the hell have you done?" "I have done precisely what any father would do when his son's wife abandons him while he's dying. I didn't abandon him. I was planning to come back." "When exactly? After you had gambled away all of Leo's inheritance at the poker table? After you had bought your lover a few more expensive trinkets? Is that not what? How did you—" "You're unemployed, Tiffany." I cut her off. "Stella Drake called me personally. She wanted to let me know that Morrison & Associates has terminated your contract, effective immediately." The silence on the other end of the line was so profound that for a moment I thought she had hung up. "You can't do this to me," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "I already have," I said, my voice colder than I had ever heard it. "And unless you are on a plane back to Denver within the next 4 hours, I assure you, things are going to get much, much worse for you." "This is insane. I'm your son's wife." "No," I stated, my voice like ice. "You were my son's wife. Now, you are just the woman who deserted my son when he needed you the most. You have 4 hours, Tiffany. I suggest you use them wisely." I ended the call and immediately blocked her number. By 5 p.m., Nurse Marks informed me that Leo's condition had shown enough improvement that the medical team was cautiously optimistic about his recovery. His heart rate had stabilized, his brain scans were looking positive, and he had even managed to squeeze my hand during one of the breaks in his sedation. By 6 p.m., my phone began to ring incessantly from unknown numbers again. Tiffany had apparently discovered other ways to try and reach me. I finally answered on the 10th call. "Your 4 hours are up," I said before she could utter a single word. "Arthur, please, you have to listen to me. I made mistakes. Horrible, terrible mistakes. But I love Leo. I love my son. We can work this out." "Where are you at this very moment, Tiffany?" I'm at the airport. I'm trying to book a flight, but none of my cards are working and I need—" "Goodbye, Tiffany." I hung up and allowed myself a grim smile. She was going to have to find her own way back from her little gambling getaway. And when she finally did arrive, if she ever managed to scrape together enough money for a ticket, she was going to find that her problems were only just beginning. Because what Tiffany didn't know was that I had already made another phone call. This one was to an old friend of mine who happened to work in the district attorney's office. Some stories about family abandonment, financial fraud, and profound moral bankruptcy, I had explained, needed to be told to the right people. And I knew exactly the right people to tell. Thursday morning delivered news that lifted my spirits in a way I hadn't felt in days. Leo had been moved out of the ICU and into a standard room. He was still incredibly weak and connected to monitors, but his eyes were open, and he was asking about his baby, about Caleb, the little miracle who had arrived 3 weeks early, but was growing stronger with each passing day in the NICU. "Where's Tiffany?" he asked me, his voice just a faint whisper. I gently smoothed his hair back from his forehead, the same comforting gesture I had used when he was a little boy. "She's taking care of some business matters, son. Don't you worry about anything right now except getting your strength back." He frowned slightly. "I thought I heard her on the phone before everything happened, talking to someone about Las Vegas. But that can't be right." "Just rest now," I said softly. "Everything is being handled." And it was. While my son slept, I was systematically and methodically dismantling the life of the woman who had very nearly destroyed his. My phone had remained silent since Tuesday evening. The desperate calls from Nevada numbers had ceased, as had the frantic text messages. I could only assume Tiffany was either making her way back or had found some other means to finance her extended vacation. In either case, I knew her silence wouldn't last for long. At 2 p.m., I was proven correct. I was in the hospital cafeteria, trying to force down a sandwich that I had no appetite for, when a sudden commotion erupted near the main entrance. I heard raised voices and saw security guards moving with urgency, the kind of disruption that brings a public space to a standstill. And there, at the very center of it all, was Tiffany Mallory. She looked as though she had been dragged through a hedge backward. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled and stained, her hair was a mess, and a layer of stubble covered her usually well-kept face. She was shouting at a security guard, her hands gesturing wildly, shaking from what I could only identify as either sheer exhaustion or withdrawal. "I need to see my husband. He's in room 314, Leo Stanley Mallory. I just had his baby." "Ma'am, you need to calm down. Please check in at the information desk." "I don't have time for that. I've been trying to get here for 2 days. My credit cards were stolen, my job." Her voice cracked with desperation. "Please, I just need to see my family." I rose slowly from my chair, adjusted the collar of my shirt, and began to walk toward the unfolding scene. As I drew closer, Tiffany spotted me. Her expression morphed from one of desperate relief to something far more menacing. "Arthur, thank God. Tell them I'm Leo's wife. Tell them to let me go upstairs." I stood there for a long moment, looking at this woman, the woman who had been gambling while my son's heart stopped, who had been cavorting with her lover while my son fought for his life, who had abandoned her newborn child for casino tables and expensive champagne. "I'm sorry," I said to the security guard, my voice clear and steady, carrying across the now silent lobby. I don't recognize this person. Tiffany's face went completely white. What are you talking about? Arthur, tell them who I am. I turned to face her directly, letting her see the cold, hard resolve in my eyes. My son's wife would never have left his side during a medical emergency. My son's wife would have been right here when he nearly died, bringing their child into this world. So, no, I'm sorry. I don't know who you are. You can't do this. Tiffany lunged toward me, but the security guard swiftly moved to block her path. She's lying. I am Leo Stanley Mallory's wife. I have rights. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. I have rights, Tiffany screamed, and I watched with a grim sense of satisfaction as every head in the lobby turned to witness her public meltdown. She stole all my money. She got me fired. She's trying to keep me away from my own family. The security guard was now joined by two more, and they began to escort a struggling Tiffany toward the exit. But she wasn't done making a scene. "This isn't over, Arthur," she yelled over her shoulder. "I know what you did, and I'll prove it. I'll get my money back. I'll get my job back. I will." The automatic doors slid shut, cutting off her threats and leaving the lobby in a state of uncomfortable silence. I smoothed the front of my jacket, thanked the security guards for their professionalism, and walked calmly toward the elevators. But I wasn't heading up to Leo's room just yet. I had another stop to make. I was going to see the hospital's chief administrator, a man named Marcus Steinberg, whom I had known for years through various charity functions and community boards. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from Marcus in his spacious corner office, presenting him with the very same photographs and documentation I had shown to Stella Drake 2 days prior. "Arthur," Marcus said, his voice heavy with disgust, "this is absolutely appalling, and she caused a disturbance in our lobby?" "I'm afraid so. She was quite loud and aggressive. A number of patients and their families witnessed the entire episode." Marcus shook his head slowly. "Given what you've shown me, and in light of her conduct today, I am issuing a temporary restraining order that will bar her from hospital property, pending a full review. Patient safety is our #1 priority here. I think that's a very prudent decision. I will also be sharing this information with our legal department and with social services. If there are any concerns about domestic instability or potential harm to the infant, we need to be proactive." I nodded gravely. "Leo's recovery must be our primary focus, and little Caleb is so vulnerable right now." After leaving Marcus's office, I made one more stop before returning to my son's bedside. The hospital chapel was empty and peaceful, with the quiet scent of old wood and candle wax hanging in the air. I sat in a front pew, and for 5 minutes, I allowed myself a moment of what could have been prayer, or perhaps meditation. Then, I took out my phone and made the call I had been planning since that first terrible morning. "Detective Services, this is Detective Hanford." "Hello, Detective. My name is Arthur Stanley, and I need to report a case of financial fraud and child endangerment." Friday morning delivered a phone call that I hadn't expected, but in retrospect I probably should have. "Mr. Stanley, this is Ryder Vance. I think we need to have a conversation." I was in Leo's hospital room, helping him practice holding Caleb for the very first time since the delivery, when the call came through. My son was finally strong enough to properly care for his baby, and the sight of them together filled me with a sense of peace that had been absent since this whole nightmare began. "Mr. Vance," I said calmly, stepping out into the hallway, "how very interesting to hear from you. Look, I'm sure you despise me, and I completely understand that. But there's something you need to know about Tiffany." "I believe I already know quite enough about Tiffany." "No, you don't," he said, his voice sharp and tinged with desperation. "She's been calling me non-stop ever since she got back to Denver. She wants me to lie for her, to say that you somehow orchestrated this whole thing to help her get back at you. I found myself genuinely intrigued. And what was your response to her? I told her to go to hell, he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. You see, Tiffany thought she was so clever. She thought she was just using me, the same way she was using everyone else. But I've been around women like her my entire life. I know how to protect myself. What exactly does that mean? It means I recorded everything, he said. Every single conversation we had about her money problems, about her plans to embezzle funds from her company's account, and about how she was planning to leave Leo after the baby was born and move to Vegas with me. I felt my heart rate quicken. You have recordings of her, mister? I learned a long time ago that married women lie about everything. So yes, I recorded every conversation we had. I saved every text message. I even took pictures of every expensive gift she bought me using money that wasn't hers. Why are you telling me all of this now? Because the second things got difficult, she threw me under the bus. She left me stranded in Las Vegas with a massive hotel bill I couldn't possibly pay. And when I called her for help, she told me I was on my own. His voice turned bitter. 3 months of promises about how she was going to leave her husband and marry me. The moment she had to choose between me and saving her own skin, she chose herself without a second's hesitation. Mr. Vance, what is it that you're proposing? I'm proposing that you and I can help each other out. You want to destroy her? I have everything you need to do it. Hours of audio recordings, hundreds of text messages, receipts for every single dollar she spent on me. I was silent for a moment, processing this completely unexpected turn of events. What do you want in return for this? I want her to pay me the money she owes me. She promised to reimburse me for my half of the expenses from the Vegas trip. Plus, she borrowed $5,000 from me last month that she never paid back. How can I be certain you're telling the truth about these recordings? Because I'm about to send you a sample. Check your email in 5 minutes. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, an email from Ryder Vance arrived in my inbox with an audio file attached. I put in my earbuds and listened to a conversation between him and Tiffany that was even more damning than I could have possibly imagined. Tiffany's voice, slightly slurred from alcohol, was unmistakable. The company account is flush with cash. They'll never even notice a few thousand missing here and there. I'll just put it back before anyone realizes it's gone. Ryder's voice. Tiff, what if you can't win it back at the poker tables? Tiffany. Then I'll just blame it on someone else. My boss loves me. She'll believe whatever story I tell her. Ryder. And what about Leo? What if he finds out? Tiffany, with a dismissive laugh. Leo is too naive to understand complex business finances. Besides, once the baby arrives, he'll be so overwhelmed with diapers and crying that he won't have time to pay attention to anything else. Ryder. And if your father-in-law starts getting suspicious? Tiffany. That old goat? Please. He might have some money, but he's just a grieving widower who has no idea how the modern world actually works. I'll handle him if he ever becomes a problem. I stopped the recording and sank heavily into the nearest chair. The casual cruelty in Tiffany's voice, the dismissive way she spoke about Leo and me, the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of her plans, it was all far worse than anything I had imagined. I called Ryder back immediately. Mr. Vance, I've listened to the sample. How much more of this do you have? Hours, he replied. And it gets much worse. She talks about embezzling money from company accounts, about using Leo's inheritance to cover her gambling debts, and about her plan to leave him after the baby was born so she wouldn't have to pay any child support. You have recordings of her saying she planned to abandon her own child? More than once. She said that having a baby was Leo's idea, and she wasn't going to let it ruin her life. She said that once we moved to Vegas together, she'd be free of all her responsibilities. A cold, final resolve settled deep within me. Any lingering shred of doubt I might have harbored about the righteousness of my actions vanished completely in that moment. Mr. Vance, I want everything you have. Every recording, every text message, every single piece of evidence. And my money? I will ensure that you are fully compensated for your cooperation. But I want to be perfectly clear about one thing. This is not about helping you get revenge on Tiffany. This is about protecting my son and my grandson from a woman who has unequivocally proven that she is a danger to their well-being. I understand, and honestly, after hearing her talk about her husband and baby the way she did, after seeing how she just deserted them when things got real, I'll be glad to help you destroy her. 2 hours later, Ryder Vance was sitting in Detective Chloe Hanford's office with his laptop, his phone, and a box filled with printed documents that chronicled 3 months of Tiffany's criminal planning and utter moral bankruptcy. I sat beside him as he played recording after recording for the detective. Tiffany's voice filled the small, sterile room, laying out her various schemes, boasting about her ability to manipulate everyone around her, and expressing a complete and total lack of regard for the welfare of her family. "This is extraordinary," Detective Hanford remarked after the 4th recording. "Miss Mallory has essentially confessed to premeditated fraud, embezzlement, and the intent to abandon her family." "There's more," Ryder said, pulling up a series of text messages on his phone. "Look at this one from 2 weeks ago." He showed us a text from Tiffany that read, "L is getting too big and needy. I can't wait to be done with this whole pregnancy thing and get back to having some fun. After the baby comes, I'm thinking of moving to Vegas permanently. Are you interested in a more permanent arrangement?" Ryder had replied. "What about your family?" Tiffany's response was chilling. "What about them? I never wanted kids anyway. This was all Leo's idea. Once I'm in Vegas, they can't touch me for child support." Detective Hanford was scribbling notes furiously. "Mr. Vance, you understand that this evidence will be used in a court of law, correct? You will need to testify as to how you obtained these recordings." "I understand. And I want to make something very clear. I had no idea she was planning to abandon her husband and baby when I first got involved with her. She told me her marriage was already over, that they were just staying together until after the delivery. But these recordings prove that she's a liar who was playing all of us. She lied to me, she lied to her husband, and she lied to her employer, and she was planning to lie to the courts to avoid her financial responsibilities as a mother. After we left the police station, I drove Ryder to his hotel. He was staying at a budget motel near the airport, a stark contrast to the luxurious accommodations Tiffany had promised him. "Mr. Vance," I said as he stepped out of the car, "I want to thank you for doing the right thing." "Don't thank me," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I'm not doing this to be noble. I'm doing this because she used me, and then discarded me the moment it became convenient for her. Nevertheless, your evidence will be instrumental in ensuring that Leo and Caleb are permanently protected from her." He paused with his hand on the car door. "Mr. Stanley, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you know to move so quickly? How did you know to freeze her accounts and get her fired before she could do any more damage?" I looked at him through the open window. This young man who had been used and discarded by the same woman who had tried to destroy my family. "Mr. Vance, I have been alive for 64 years. I've raised a son, I've buried a wife, and I've built a life that I am proud of. In all that time, I have learned one very important lesson." "What's that?" "When someone shows you who they truly are, believe them. Believe them immediately and without hesitation. And when someone threatens your family, you destroy them before they have a chance to destroy you." Monday morning brought the moment I had been waiting for since that first dreadful phone call from the hospital. I was in the NICU, feeding Caleb, when Detective Hanford appeared at my side. "Mr. Stanley, we have arrest warrants for Tiffany Mallory. Financial fraud, embezzlement, child abandonment, and criminal negligence. With Mr. Vance's recordings and the documentation you provided, the district attorney feels we have more than enough evidence to secure a conviction." I looked down at my grandson, sleeping peacefully in my arms, completely oblivious to the fact that justice was finally being served on his behalf. "Where will you find her?" "She's been staying at the Riverside Motel since Wednesday. We'll be executing the warrants this afternoon at 3 p.m. I was in Leo's room later that day when my phone rang. Detective Hanford's name appeared on the screen. "Mr. Stanley, Tiffany Mallory has been arrested without incident. She's being processed as we speak, and her initial court appearance is scheduled for tomorrow morning." A profound sense of relief and satisfaction washed over me. "What charges will she be facing?" "All of them. The evidence against her is overwhelming. The DA is confident about securing convictions on every single count. And bail? Given the significant flight risk, her documented plans to move to Las Vegas permanently, and the severity of the charges, we will be asking for a substantial bail amount, or for her to be remanded into custody." That evening, Leo finally felt strong enough to ask the hard questions. "Dad, where is Tiffany? Really? The nurses keep giving me these strange looks, and nobody will give me a straight answer." I sat down on the edge of his bed and took his hand in mine. "Son, Tiffany has been arrested." His face went pale. "Arrested? For what?" I told him everything. The Las Vegas trip with her lover while he was in labor, the gambling with their life savings while he fought for his life, the recordings where she detailed her plans to abandon him and Caleb permanently, the theft from her company's account to finance her affair. Leo listened in stunned silence, tears streaming down his face. When I had finished, he was quiet for a very long time. "I knew something was wrong," he finally whispered. "For months I knew. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she would look at me when I was so excited about the baby, like I was ruining her life. It is not your fault that you trusted your wife, but I should have seen it. I should have protected myself, protected Caleb." "No," I said firmly. "She should have been trustworthy. She should have honored her vows. The failure here is not yours, Leo. It is hers, and hers alone." He was quiet again, processing the enormity of what I had told him. "What happens now?" "Now, you focus on getting better and taking care of Caleb. The legal system will handle Tiffany." "How long? How long could she go to prison for?" Detective Hanford estimates 8 to 12 years, given the amount of money involved and the aggravating circumstances. Leo looked utterly shocked. "That long? She stole from her company. She abandoned her husband during a life-threatening medical emergency, and she was actively planning to disappear to avoid paying child support. What part of that suggests she deserves any mercy?" That night, I sat alone in the hospital chapel, reflecting on everything that had transpired over the past week. In less than a week, I had gone from being a grieving father, watching his son fight for his life, to an instrument of justice, ensuring that the woman responsible for that fight would pay a steep price for her crimes. Some people might label it revenge. I called it protection. Protection for Leo, protection for Caleb, and protection for any future man who might be foolish enough to trust Tiffany Mallory with his heart or his future. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Hanford. "Bail hearing tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thought you'd want to know. Her attorney is already asking about a plea deal." I texted back immediately. "What kind of deal?" "Reduced charges in exchange for full restitution. The DA wants to know how the victims feel about that." I stared at the phone for a long moment, then typed out my response. The victims want a full prosecution, no deals. Justice, I had come to understand, wasn't about forgiveness or mercy. It was about ensuring that the consequences fit the actions. And Tiffany Mallory's actions demanded consequences that would guarantee she would never again have the opportunity to destroy another family the way she had tried to destroy mine. 3 weeks after Caleb's birth, Leo was finally well enough to come home. The doctors had given both him and the baby a clean bill of health, and I had spent the intervening time preparing my house to accommodate 3 generations of Stanley men. I had converted my late wife Martha's study into a beautiful nursery, complete with the finest crib money could buy, and a comfortable rocking chair positioned by the window where I could watch my grandson sleep in the soft afternoon sunlight. Leo would stay in his old childhood bedroom until he was strong enough to start making decisions about his future. But first, there was the matter of Tiffany's trial. Detective Hanford called me on a Tuesday morning while I was preparing breakfast for Leo. He was sitting at my kitchen table, finally starting to look like his old self again, with the color returning to his cheeks and the strength back in his voice. "Mr. Stanley, I wanted to give you an update on the case. The district attorney has decided to move forward with all charges against Miss Mallory." "What are the specific charges?" "Criminal fraud in the first degree, embezzlement, child abandonment, and criminal negligence. With Mr. Vance's recordings and the financial documentation you provided, we have more than enough evidence for a conviction on all counts." I set down my coffee cup carefully. And what kind of sentence might she be looking at? Given the amount of money involved and the severe aggravating circumstances abandoning her family during a medical emergency, her clear plans to avoid child support, we are now looking at a potential sentence of 10 to 15 years in state prison. Leo looked up sharply from his oatmeal. He had been listening to my side of the conversation, and I could see the shock registering in his eyes. "Detective," I said, "when is this likely to go to trial?" "The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next month. If she doesn't plead guilty, the trial will likely be sometime in the early spring." After I hung up the phone, Leo and I sat in silence for a long moment. Caleb was sleeping soundly in his bouncer next to the table, his tiny fist curled against his cheek, completely oblivious to the legal storm that was about to determine his mother's fate. 10 to 15 years, Leo said quietly, his voice filled with disbelief. "That's what happens when you steal from your employer and abandon your family," I replied, my own voice firm. "Dad, I know what she did was terrible. I know she betrayed all of us. But Caleb is going to grow up without a mother." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Son, Caleb was never going to have a real mother anyway. Tiffany made that abundantly clear in her own recorded words. She was planning to abandon both of you the moment he was born. But maybe if she went to counseling, or if we tried family therapy." "Leo," I said, keeping my voice gentle but resolute, "listen to me very carefully. This isn't about punishment for the sake of punishment. This is about protecting you and Caleb from a woman who has proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that she cannot be trusted with your well-being." Before Leo could respond, my phone rang again. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't expected to see. Patricia Mallory, Tiffany's mother. I answered on the third ring. "Hello, Patricia." "Arthur, we need to talk." Her voice was strained, sounding much older than I remembered. "About Tiffany, about these charges, about our grandson." "What about them? You can't possibly be serious about going through with this prosecution. Tiffany made some mistakes, yes, but completely destroying her life isn't going to help anyone." I walked into the living room, out of Leo's earshot. "Patricia, your daughter embezzled money, abandoned her husband and newborn son during a medical crisis, and was actively planning to disappear to Las Vegas permanently. Those aren't mistakes. They are calculated choices. She was under a lot of pressure. The gambling just got out of hand, but she can get help for that. She was under pressure, so she decided to steal from her company and cheat on her husband while he was expecting a child. Is that really your defense? Arthur, please. She's our only child. If she goes to prison for that long, her life will be over. Her life was over the moment she chose a poker table and her lover over her own family. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was pleading. What is it that you want? Money? We can pay restitution for whatever she stole. We can get her into a treatment program. We can make this right. You can't make abandoning a dying husband right, Patricia. You can't make planning to desert your newborn son right. And you most certainly cannot make embezzling from your employer right. I just don't believe she would do those things. Then you are more than welcome to attend the trial and listen to the recordings for yourself. But I should warn you, what you hear might permanently change the way you feel about your daughter. I hung up the phone and returned to the kitchen, where Leo was now feeding Caleb. That was Tiffany's mother, I said simply. What did she want? The same thing everyone wants when they are caught doing something wrong: forgiveness without any consequences. Leo looked down at Caleb, who was now gripping his father's finger with a surprising amount of strength. Dad, what if we're wrong about this? What if there's some explanation that we haven't considered? I sat back down across from my son and spoke with all the love and firmness I could possibly muster. Leo, I want you to imagine something for me. Imagine that 10 years from now, Caleb comes to you and tells you that his wife gambled away all of their savings, cheated on him while he was expecting a child, and then abandoned him during a medical emergency. What would you tell him to do? Leo was quiet for a long time. I'd tell him to leave her, he finally said. And if he told you that he wanted to try and work it out, if he said that maybe she deserved another chance, I'd tell him that someone who could do those things once would absolutely do them again. Lauren's voice was barely a whisper now. I'd tell him that he and his children deserved so much better. Exactly, I said. And that is all I am doing for you. I am protecting you and Caleb in the exact same way you would one day protect him. Over the next several weeks, I worked closely with the prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Jane Morrison, to prepare for the trial. We meticulously reviewed all the evidence, practiced our testimonies, and constructed an airtight case that would ensure Tiffany Mallory would never again have the opportunity to destroy another family. The recordings Ryder had provided were absolutely devastating. Hour after hour of Tiffany's voice, callously planning her escape from responsibility, joking about my son's excitement for the baby, and scheming to embezzle money from her employer. Any jury that heard those recordings would understand exactly the kind of person they were dealing with. But Morrison wanted to be thorough. Mr. Stanley, you need to be prepared. The defense is going to try and paint you as a vindictive father-in-law who manipulated this entire situation. Let them try, I said. I have financial records, eyewitnesses, and a detailed timeline that proves I acted in direct response to her abandonment, not as the instigator of some elaborate revenge plot. They will also argue that your actions freezing the accounts, getting her fired, were excessive and malicious. My actions were protective, I countered. When someone abandons your son during a life-threatening medical emergency, you take every necessary step to ensure they cannot cause any further harm. Morrison nodded, a look of grim determination on her face. And that is exactly how we will present it to the jury. Wonderful people. I need to pause here for a moment and speak directly to anyone out there who has ever been profoundly betrayed by someone they trusted completely. Your pain is real and valid. Your anger is more than justified. And your determination to protect yourself and your loved ones is not only understandable, it is absolutely necessary. Sometimes, the very people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who end up hurting us the deepest. But I want you to remember this. You are stronger than their betrayal, and you deserve so much better. Our book, Finding Strength in the Storm, has helped thousands of people rebuild their lives after facing devastating betrayals. It is filled with compassionate guidance for healing your heart and practical, actionable steps for creating the life you truly deserve. Please click the link in the description and begin your journey toward peace today. And please, if author's story is resonating with you, hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us. The courthouse in downtown Denver was packed to the rafters on the morning of Tiffany Mallory's trial. Word of the case had spread like wildfire through our social circles. The story of the successful businesswoman who had abandoned her dying husband to go on a gambling spree with her lover. Curiosity had drawn a diverse crowd that included friends, former colleagues, and complete strangers who had read about the sensational case in the local newspapers. I arrived at 9 a.m., sharp, dressed in my best charcoal suit and the gold watch my late wife had given me. Leo had chosen to stay home with Caleb, understandably unable to face the ordeal of watching his wife's public and complete destruction. I respected his decision, though a part of me wished he could be here to witness this final chapter play out. Ada Morrison met me just outside the courtroom. She was a woman in her early 40s, with a kind of sharp, focused intelligence that comes from years of successfully putting criminals behind bars. "Mr. Stanley, are you ready for this?" "I've been ready since the day she deserted my son," I replied without hesitation. "Good, because her defense attorney is going to do everything she can to paint you as a vindictive, manipulative father-in-law." I allowed myself a small, confident smile. "Let her try. I have documentation, eyewitnesses, and audio recordings." "What does she have?" "Desperate theories and baseless character assassination attempts." Inside the courtroom, I took my seat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution's table. Across the aisle, I could see Patricia and Donald Mallory, Tiffany's parents. They looked haggard and much older than their years. Patricia steadfastly avoided my gaze, but Donald gave me a grim, reluctant nod. Trent herself looked like a completely different person from the confident, ambitious woman who had married my son 4 years ago. Her hair was cut short. Her face was thin and drawn, and the standard issue orange jumpsuit made her look diminished and utterly powerless. When she glanced back at the gallery, her eyes met mine for a fleeting moment before quickly darting away. Judge Melinda Reich called the court to order. At 61, she had a reputation for her no-nonsense approach to white-collar crime and a particular disdain for defendants who victimized their own families. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Ada Morrison began in her opening statement, "this case is about a woman who made a series of calculated choices that unequivocally reveal her true character. When faced with the responsibility of supporting her husband during his pregnancy, she chose to steal from her employer. When her husband went into labor with life-threatening complications, she chose to gamble with her lover in Las Vegas. When her premature son was struggling for his life in the NICU, she chose to remain in Nevada, buying expensive gifts for her boyfriend. Morrison expertly walked the jury through the timeline of events, the mountain of evidence, and the damning recordings that would prove not just Tiffany's actions, but her cold, calculated intentions. She painted a vivid picture of a woman so profoundly self-centered, so utterly lacking in basic human decency, that she could abandon her family during their moment of greatest crisis. You will hear, in the defendant's own words, her detailed plans to disappear to Las Vegas permanently, leaving her husband and newborn son with absolutely nothing. You will hear her laugh about her husband's physical struggles during the pregnancy and joke about how she planned to avoid paying child support. This is not a case about a woman who simply made a mistake. This is a case about a woman who revealed her true, monstrous nature when her family needed her the most. Tiffany's defense attorney, Sandra Kellerman, had the unenviable task of trying to defend the indefensible. Her opening statement focused on attempting to portray Tiffany as a woman who was under immense pressure and had made a series of poor choices, but who didn't deserve to have her entire life destroyed as a result. Ladies and gentlemen, my client is guilty of poor judgment. She is guilty of infidelity. She is guilty of gambling when she should have been more responsible. But the charges that have been brought against her: criminal fraud, child abandonment, criminal negligence, these are serious felonies that should be reserved for truly malicious criminals, not a woman who simply got in over her head. She tried to suggest that I had somehow manipulated the entire situation, that my swift and decisive actions showed premeditation rather than protective instincts. But without a shred of evidence to support her theories, her arguments sounded hollow and desperate. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over the next 3 days. Bank records clearly showed the pattern of theft from Morrison and Associates. Credit card statements proved, beyond any doubt, that Tiffany had used family funds to finance her Las Vegas trip. Hospital records confirmed the precise timeline of Leo's medical emergency and Tiffany's prolonged absence. But the most devastating evidence of all came when Ryder Vance took the stand. He looked different than I had expected, less flashy, more ordinary. Dressed in a conservative suit with his hair neatly combed, he could have been anyone's son or brother. "Mr. Vance," Ada Morrison began, "how did you meet the defendant?" "At a casino here in Denver. She told me she was separated from her husband and that they were planning to get a divorce after the holidays." "Did she ever mention that her husband was expecting a child?" "Not at first. When she finally did tell me, she said it was an accident, that she didn't want children, and that she was planning to move to Las Vegas after the divorce was finalized." Morrison then proceeded to play recording after recording. Tiffany's voice, casual and callous, filled the courtroom as she described her plans to abandon her family, her schemes to embezzle from her company, and her complete and utter lack of regard for anyone but herself. The expressions on the jury's faces grew more and more disgusted with each new revelation. When they heard Tiffany laugh about Leo's pregnancy symptoms and joke about getting out of paying child support, several of the jurors actually shook their heads in disbelief. "Mr. Vance," Morrison continued, "did the defendant ever express any concern for her husband's welfare or the welfare of her unborn child?" "Never. She only ever talked about them as if they were obstacles standing in the way of her freedom." When Kellerman cross-examined Ryder, she tried to paint him as a vindictive ex-lover, but Ryder held his ground. "Isn't it true, Mr. Vance, that you recorded these conversations without Miss Mallory's knowledge?" "Yes, that's true." "And isn't it also true that you were angry when she abandoned you in Las Vegas?" "I was angry when I realized that she had lied to me about everything. But I would have provided these recordings regardless of my personal feelings, because what she said about abandoning her husband and baby was just plain wrong." On the 4th day of the trial, I took the stand. ADA Morrison calmly walked me through the timeline of events. From the night Leo went into labor to the moment I discovered Tiffany's location and her activities. I spoke calmly and factually, letting the evidence speak for itself. "Mr. Stanley, why did you decide to freeze the joint accounts?" "Because my son was fighting for his life, and his wife was using their money to finance her affair instead of being at his bedside." "Some might say that your actions were extreme." "Some might say that abandoning your husband and newborn son is extreme. I simply did what any father would do to protect his child. When Kellerman cross-examined me, she did her best to make me appear vindictive and controlling. Mr. Stanley, isn't it true that you never approved of your son's marriage to Miss Mallory? I had some concerns about their compatibility, yes. And isn't it true that you saw this crisis as an opportunity to finally end their marriage? I looked directly at the jury. Miss Kellerman, if I had wanted to end their marriage, I could have shown my son the evidence of her affair and her gambling addiction at any time. I acted when I did because she abandoned my son during the most dangerous and vulnerable moment of his life. But you admit that you acted quickly and decisively to destroy her financial situation. I acted quickly and decisively to protect my family from a woman who had proven beyond any doubt that she could not be trusted with their welfare. The defense's case was brief and utterly unconvincing. Tiffany herself chose not to testify, most likely because the audio recordings had already revealed her character more clearly and damningly than any courtroom testimony ever could. During her closing arguments, Ada Morrison summarized the case with devastating clarity. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard the defendant, in her own words, planning to abandon her husband and child. You have seen the irrefutable evidence of her systematic theft from her employer. You have learned that while her husband fought for his life and her son struggled to survive, she was gambling away their future with her lover. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. This is not a case about a woman who made a few mistakes. This is a case about a woman who revealed her true character when it mattered the most. And her character is that of someone who is fundamentally unfit to be trusted with anyone's welfare, financial or otherwise. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. On the charge of criminal fraud in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty, Your Honor. On the charge of embezzlement in the first degree, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of criminal child abandonment, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of criminal negligence, how do you find? Guilty. As the verdicts were read, one by one, I watched Tiffany's face crumble. Her parents were openly weeping. Her attorney looked utterly defeated, but I felt only a profound sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served, and my family was finally safe. Sentencing day arrived on a crisp February morning, exactly 4 months after Caleb's birth. I arrived at the courthouse early, wanting to secure a good seat for what I knew would be the final chapter in the downfall of Tiffany Mallory. Leo had asked to come with me this time. He said he needed to see it through to the end, needed to hear the judge's final words about the woman he had once loved. Caleb was being looked after by my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had become an invaluable source of help and support during Leo's recovery. The courtroom was less crowded than it had been during the trial, but the atmosphere was even more tense. This was the moment when abstract concepts of justice would become concrete reality, when Tiffany would learn the exact cost of her choices. Judge Reich called the court to order and reviewed the case file one final time. Then, she looked directly at Tiffany. Miss Mallory, you have been convicted by a jury of your peers of multiple felony charges. Before I impose my sentence, I want to address the nature of your crimes and the profound impact they have had on your victims. The judge's voice carried the weight of years spent dealing with the worst aspects of human nature, but there was a particular steel in her tone that suggested this case had affected her on a personal level. In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen defendants who committed crimes out of desperation. I have seen defendants who acted out of mental illness, and defendants who simply made a series of poor choices in difficult circumstances. You, Miss Mallory, are not one of those defendants. The evidence presented at your trial clearly shows that your crimes were calculated, premeditated, and committed with an utter and complete disregard for the welfare of your own family. You systematically stole from your employer while actively planning to abandon your husband and newborn child. When your husband faced a life-threatening medical emergency, you chose to continue gambling with your lover rather than return to his bedside. Judge Reich paused, letting her words hang in the silent courtroom. But what I find most troubling, Miss Mallory, are the recordings we all listened to during the trial. Your own words revealed a level of callousness toward your family that is truly shocking. You laughed about your husband's pregnancy difficulties. You joked about avoiding child support. You planned to disappear to Las Vegas permanently, leaving your husband and son with absolutely nothing. Leo's hand found mine under the table, and I squeezed it gently. The court has received several letters asking for leniency, the judge continued, including one from your parents. But the court has also received victim impact statements from those you have harmed. I had spent hours carefully crafting my victim impact statement, wanting to capture not just the financial damage Tiffany had caused, but the deeper, more profound betrayal of trust that had nearly destroyed my son. Mr. Leo Stanley writes, "My wife's abandonment during the most dangerous moment of my life has left scars that may never fully heal. While I was fighting for my life after our son's birth, she was gambling away our future. When our premature baby needed both of his parents, she chose her own selfish desires over his welfare. I trusted her with my heart, my life, and my child's future. Her betrayal of that trust has fundamentally changed who I am as a person." I felt Leo's shoulders shake slightly as his own words were read aloud. Mr. Arthur Stanley writes, "The defendant's actions nearly cost me my son and put my grandson at significant risk. Her theft of family funds during a medical crisis showed a level of callousness that defies comprehension. But beyond the financial crimes, her emotional abandonment of her family during their greatest moment of need reveals a character that is fundamentally unfit for the responsibilities of marriage and parenthood." Judge Reich set down the papers and looked directly at Tiffany once more. "Miss Mallory, do you have anything to say before I impose my sentence?" Tiffany stood up slowly, her legs visibly shaking. Her attorney had obviously coached her, but I could see the internal struggle between her feigned remorse and her natural arrogance. "Your Honor," she began, her voice barely audible, "I know I made terrible mistakes. I hurt the people I loved, and I take full responsibility for my actions. It was the right thing to say, but it sounded hollow and rehearsed." Judge Reich waited a moment to see if Tiffany had anything more to add. When it became clear that she didn't, the judge nodded. "Miss Mallory, the court finds that your crimes were serious, calculated, and caused substantial and lasting harm to your victims. The evidence shows a consistent pattern of behavior that prioritized your own selfish desires over the most basic and fundamental responsibilities of marriage and parenthood." The judge consulted her notes one final time. "On the charge of criminal fraud in the first degree, I sentence you to 8 years in state prison. On the charge of embezzlement in the first degree, I sentence you to 6 years in state prison. On the charge of criminal child abandonment, I sentence you to 5 years in state prison. On the charge of criminal negligence, I sentence you to 3 years in state prison." I held my breath, waiting for the crucial detail. "These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently, for a total of 22 years in state prison." The courtroom erupted. Patricia Mallory let out a piercing scream. Donald slumped forward in his seat as if he had been physically struck. Tiffany's attorney immediately began talking about appeals, but Tiffany herself just stood there, staring at the judge as if she couldn't comprehend what she had just heard. 22 years. By the time she was released, Caleb would be in college. Leo would have rebuilt his entire life. I might not even be alive to see her release. Furthermore, Judge Reich continued, her voice unwavering, you are ordered to pay full restitution to Morrison and Associates in the amount of $67,000, plus interest and penalties. You are also prohibited from contacting the victims, either directly or indirectly, for the duration of your sentence and for a period of 10 years following your release. As the bailiffs prepared to escort Tiffany back to prison, she turned toward our section of the courtroom. Her eyes found Leo first, and I saw him recoil slightly from the intensity of her gaze. Then she looked at me. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the courtroom, the woman who had tried to destroy my family, and the man who had destroyed her life in return. I kept my expression neutral, dignified, but I wanted her to see the unyielding satisfaction in my eyes. She had gambled with the wrong family, and now she would spend the next 2 decades paying for that catastrophic mistake. 6 months have passed since Tiffany Mallory was sentenced to 22 years in prison. As I write this, Caleb is sleeping peacefully in his crib upstairs, and Leo is working on his laptop at my kitchen table, taking online courses to complete his teaching degree. The house feels different now. Lighter somehow. The heavy shadow of Tiffany's presence has been lifted, replaced by the gentle, comforting rhythms of 3 generations of men building a new life together. Leo has filed for divorce, of course. The proceedings were swift and uncontested. It's difficult to mount much of a defense from a prison cell. He was awarded full custody of Caleb, the house, and what little remained of their joint assets after restitution was paid. But more than the legal victories, what strikes me most is how Leo has blossomed in Tiffany's absence. The nervous, apologetic man who used to constantly make excuses for his wife's behavior has been replaced by someone stronger, more confident, and more at peace with himself and his choices. "Dad," he said to me last week, as we watched Caleb take his first tentative, wobbly steps across my living room floor, "I need to thank you." "For what?" "For seeing what I couldn't see. For protecting us when I was too weak to protect myself." I smoothed Caleb's hair as he tumbled into my arms, giggling with that pure, unadulterated joy that only babies possess. "You weren't weak, son. You were loyal. There's nothing wrong with giving someone the benefit of the doubt, but you knew from the very beginning. You knew what kind of person she was. I had known, or at least I had suspected. There had been signs, the gambling, the secretive phone calls, the dismissive way she would look at Leo when she thought no one was watching. But knowing something and being able to prove it are 2 very different things. And I had needed solid, irrefutable evidence before I could act. "I knew she was selfish," I said. "I didn't know she was capable of abandoning you while you were dying. Do you ever regret what you did? The way you destroyed her life so completely?" I considered the question carefully. It wasn't the first time Leo had asked it, and I suspected it wouldn't be the last. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret protecting my family from someone who had proven themselves to be a clear and present danger to their welfare. But 22 years. That means Caleb will be an adult before she's released. She'll be old enough to make her own decisions about whether or not she wants him in her life. And if she does, she'll do it from a position of strength, not as a child who never knew any different." That evening, after Leo and Caleb had gone to bed, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine and thought about the path that had brought us to this point. Some people might say that I had been too harsh, too calculating, too unforgiving. They might argue that family should mean something, that everyone deserves a chance at redemption, that revenge is never the answer. But those people had never held their dying son's hand while his wife gambled with her lover. They had never watched a premature baby fight for his life, while his mother chose casino tables over her family's welfare. I received one letter from Tiffany about 3 months after her sentencing. She wrote from the state penitentiary, asking for my forgiveness, claiming she had found religion and wanted to make amends. She begged me to bring Caleb to visit her, to allow her to be a part of her son's life. I read the letter twice, then fed it into my paper shredder. Some people deserve second chances, but some people forfeit that right when they show you exactly who they are in the moment when character matters most. Tiffany Mallory revealed herself to be someone who would abandon a dying husband and a struggling newborn for the thrill of a casino table and the company of her lover. That revelation cannot be unrevealed, no matter how many Bible verses she might quote from her prison cell. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Detective Hanford. "Mr. Stanley, I wanted to update you on something. We've been contacted by authorities in Nevada about additional charges against Miss Mallory." "What kind of charges?" "Apparently, she ran up some significant debts in Las Vegas that she was unable to pay. There's evidence of check fraud and identity theft. The Nevada DA is interested in extraditing her for prosecution after she serves her time here." I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Even from behind bars, Tiffany's past was catching up with her. How much additional time might she face? It's hard to say for certain, but it could potentially add another 5 to 7 years to her sentence. After hanging up, I reflected on the call. Tiffany's suffering wasn't bringing me joy, exactly, but it was bringing me a profound sense of peace. The woman who had nearly destroyed my family was now facing consequences that matched the staggering scope of her betrayal. Caleb stirred on the baby monitor upstairs, making the soft, gentle sounds that babies make as they settle into a deeper sleep. I went up to check on him, adjusting his blanket and smoothing his hair. He looked so much like Leo at that age. The same delicate features, the same stubborn chin that marked him as a Stanley man. "Your mommy made some very poor choices, little one," I whispered to his sleeping form. "But don't you worry. Grandpa Arthur made sure those choices have consequences. You're safe now. You're loved, and you're never going to have to wonder if the people who are supposed to protect you will actually be there when you need them the most." As I prepared for bed that night, I felt a profound sense of completion. Justice had been served. My family was safe, and Caleb would grow up knowing that when someone threatens the people you love, you respond with swift, decisive, and overwhelming force. Some stories end with forgiveness and reconciliation, but some stories end with justice and protection. This was one of the latter, and I was proud of every single moment of it. 2 years have passed since that phone call at 3:17 a.m. Changed everything. As I write this final chapter, Caleb is taking his first wobbly steps across my living room, his laughter filling a house that has known too much sorrow and is finally learning the sound of joy again. Lauren completed his teaching degree and now works at the local elementary school. He bought a small house just 10 minutes from mine, close enough for daily visits, but far enough to establish his own independence. He's dating a wonderful woman named Diane who teaches at the same school, a kind, steady person who treats Caleb like her own son and looks at Leo as if he's the most precious thing in the world. Because he is. I often think about the man I was before that phone call changed everything. I was a widower, financially comfortable but somewhat aimless, still grieving my wife and wondering what purpose my life held. I thought my most important days were behind me. I was wrong. The day I decided to protect my family from Tiffany Mallory was the day I discovered that age doesn't make you weak. It makes you precise. That experience doesn't make you fragile. It makes you formidable. That having lived through loss and heartbreak doesn't diminish you. It teaches you exactly what's worth fighting for. Last month, I received a call from a young man named Stephen, whose wife had abandoned him during a cancer diagnosis to pursue her personal trainer. He had heard about my case through mutual friends and wanted my advice. "Mr. Stanley," he said, his voice shaking, "I don't know what to do. She cleaned out our savings account and left me with nothing but a mountain of medical bills. Everyone tells me I should try to work it out, that all marriages go through rough patches." "Stephen," I said gently, "let me ask you something. If your son came to you 20 years from now and told you his wife had abandoned him during cancer treatment, what would you tell him to do?" "I'd tell him to leave her," he said immediately, without a moment's hesitation. "Then you have your answer." I spent 2 hours on the phone with Stephen that day, walking him through the steps I had taken to protect Leo and Caleb. By the end of our conversation, he had a clear plan of action and the phone numbers of the best divorce attorney and private investigator in his city. 6 weeks later, he called to tell me his wife had been arrested for fraud and embezzlement. Her trainer had abandoned her the moment the money ran out. Stephen was now cancer-free and financially secure, having successfully recovered the assets she had stolen from their joint accounts. "You saved my life," he told me. "No," I replied. "You saved your own life. I just showed you that you had the power to do it all along." That conversation made me realize something important. My experience with Tiffany wasn't just about protecting my own family. It was about learning lessons that could help other men in similar, desperate situations. I've started writing a book about my experience, not this story, but a practical guide for men who find themselves betrayed by the women they trusted the most. A handbook for protection, for justice, and for ensuring that actions have appropriate and severe consequences. The working title is "When Love Becomes War: A Father's Guide to Protecting Your Family." Yesterday, I was in my garden when I saw a young man walking past my house, pushing a stroller and crying. Something about his posture, his dejected slump, reminded me so much of Leo during those dark days when he was still making excuses for Tiffany's behavior. I invited him in for a cup of tea. His name was Michael, and his story was heartbreakingly familiar. A wife who was gambling away their savings, mysterious late nights, and secretive phone calls. A baby who deserved better than a mother who saw her family as an obstacle to her own freedom. "I just don't know what to do," he said, cradling his 6-month-old son. "Everyone says I should give her another chance, that she's just under a lot of stress from work." I looked at this young man, so much like my son had been, and I felt that familiar fire kindle in my chest. "Michael," I said, setting down my teacup, "let me tell you what I learned when my son's wife abandoned him while he was dying." 2 hours later, Michael left my house with a plan, a phone number for Detective Hanford, and most importantly, the knowledge that he didn't have to accept betrayal simply because it came from someone who was supposed to love him. Caleb toddled over to me as I was cleaning up the tea service, reaching up to be held. I scooped him into my arms and carried him to the window, where we could see Michael walking down the street with a straighter spine and a more determined stride. "That man is about to change his life, little one," I told Caleb. "He's about to learn that he's stronger than he knows." Caleb babbled something that might have been agreement and reached for my gold watch, the one Martha had given me, the one that had become my armor during the battle for my family's future. As the sun set over my garden, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. Some people might read this story and think I was too harsh, too calculating, too unforgiving. They might say that family should mean something, that everyone deserves redemption, that revenge is never the answer. But those people have never been forced to choose between mercy and protection. They've never had to decide whether to forgive someone who showed them their true, monstrous nature in a moment of crisis. I chose protection. I chose consequences. I chose to ensure that a woman who would abandon her dying husband and newborn son would face a justice that matched the scope of her betrayal. And I would make the exact same choice again tomorrow, and every day after that. My name is Arthur Stanley. I am 66 years old, and I am the grandfather of the most beautiful little boy in the world. I am also the man who destroyed a woman who threatened my family. Some people call it revenge. I call it love in its most fierce and protective form. Caleb fell asleep in my arms as the stars began to appear, and I carried him upstairs to his crib. As I tucked him in, I whispered the same promise I had made to him the night his mother was sentenced. You're safe now, sweetheart. You're loved. And you're never going to have to wonder if the people who are supposed to protect you will actually be there when you need them the most. Because the people we love deserve our protection, even when that protection comes at a price, especially when it comes at a price. And if that makes me ruthless, then I will gladly be ruthless. Because some things are worth any price, and the safety of the people I love is at the very top of that list. As I write these final words, I can hear Leo humming in the kitchen as he prepares Caleb's bottle for the morning. It's a sound of contentment, of security, of a man who has learned that he deserves better than betrayal and abandonment. Tiffany Mallory gambled with the wrong family. She thought she could abandon her husband and son without consequences, steal from her employer without detection, and manipulate everyone around her without accountability. She was wrong on all counts. Justice isn't always served in courtrooms. Sometimes it's served by a 64-year-old man with a gold watch and a fierce determination to protect his family. Sometimes it's served by freezing bank accounts at 4 a.m. and making phone calls that destroy careers and reputations. Sometimes justice looks like a father's love armed with resources, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to let anyone harm his child. Tiffany will spend the next 22 years learning that actions have consequences. My son will spend those same years rebuilding his life, raising his son, and discovering that he is stronger than he ever imagined. And I will spend them knowing that when my family needed protection, I provided it completely, permanently, and without a single apology. That's what love looks like when it's tested by betrayal. That's what a father does when someone threatens his child. And that's why some people should be very, very careful about the families they choose to destroy. Because some of us destroy back. Wonderful souls, as Arthur's story comes to an end, I want you to remember something powerful. You are never too old to be fierce, never too tired to fight for what truly matters, and never too vulnerable to be victorious. Arthur's strength didn't come from a place of hatred. It came from a place of love, a deep love for his son, a profound love for his grandson, and ultimately, a love for himself and his own worth. If you are going through your own season of betrayal or struggle, please remember that you have more power within you than you know. Our book, Finding Strength in the Storm, will help you find that power and use it to build the life you deserve. Click the link in the description. Your breakthrough is waiting. Please subscribe for more incredible stories of individuals who refuse to be victims. And always remember, your story is still being written, and you are the one who gets to decide how it ends. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.